Hello guys, welcome back to TFD with Cordy. The WNBPA might have just blown this thing up right before the WNBA CBA deadline. And listen, I'm not sitting here pretending to be some labor law expert or front office insider. I'm not a CBA specialist. I'm not a business analyst. I'm just a diehard WNBA fan who's tired of the drama and tired of the clock ticking. We are less than a week away from the deadline to avoid delays to the WNBA season. Training camps, games, everything is on the line. And now this news drops, and it shifts the entire vibe of these negotiations. Everything we thought was steady suddenly feels shaky. I'm not Andrew, okay? He's the cap guru. I'm just giving you my real, unfiltered reaction. I read this article and had to pause for a second. It's that serious. So let's break it down together. Let's really look at what this means. So we have that, but as you can see here, Kelsey Plum wrote a letter, acquired by ESPN, to the executive director expressing serious concerns about how the PA is handling the current negotiations, including the lack of adequate player involvement in the process. As far as I'm aware, one of the three people sent it to ESPN, and obviously it's the players. At the end of the day, they want this out there, because Stewie, Fee, and these other players want a season. They want a season. So let's take a look at this right here. This is an article from Alexa Philippou and Don Van Natta Jr. Okay, so here said, WNBA-PA executive members Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart wrote a 3-page letter Monday to Players Union Executive Director Terri Jackson, expressing serious concerns about how the PA is handling the current negotiations, including the lack of adequate player involvement in the process. In the private communication, which was obtained Tuesday by ESPN, Plum, the first vice president of the union, and Stewart, a vice president, requested a changed dynamic between our PA administrators and the players, and said, "We do not feel like we have an adequate seat at the table in these negotiations." The union held a call with its players Tuesday evening, according to sources, to address the issues raised by Stewie and Plum, as well as the results of a Players Association survey sent in recent days, polling players on their thoughts towards the league's latest CBA proposal. Yeah, I really mean this when I say it. We've been calling this out from the very beginning. These surveys, you have to take them with a grain of salt, because from everything we've gathered, they're not truly anonymous. Players' names are attached, and that changes everything. If your name is on it, are you really going to be honest? Or are you going to say what feels safe? These players are scared to speak up, scared to push back, scared to say anything that might be seen as going against the PA. And when fear is part of the equation, you're not getting real feedback. You're getting filtered answers. And that's a problem. Here said, Jackson shared the letter with the executive committee earlier Tuesday, sources said. It's unclear whether the rest of the 7-player executive committee agrees with Plum and Stewart's sentiments on WNBA-PA leadership, or whether they were informed before the letter was sent. Sources have indicated that some members are content with the union's handling of negotiations. So I'm not joking when I say this. If other players were truly on Stewie and Plum's side, their names would be on that letter. It's really that simple. They would have signed it. They didn't. That tells you everything. Right now, it feels like it's Fee out front, and I'm not saying she's trying to burn down the WNBA, but she's clearly the face of the unrivaled movement. She's positioned as the figurehead of this idea that unrivaled can grow, can scale, maybe even compete long-term. And from the outside looking in, it feels like she genuinely believes unrivaled has the potential to overtake the WNBA model if things break the right way. Then you've got veteran players who are near the end of their careers, and whether people want to admit it or not, some of them may not be thinking 5 or 10 years down the line. They're thinking about right now. If the league stalls or collapses, they won't be around for the rebuild anyway, so the long-term damage doesn't hit them the same way. Meanwhile, the PA is playing hardball. Everyone keeps saying, oh, the players have saved. They can afford to miss a season. But what about the owners? If a season gets wiped out and they lose $100 to $200 million, they're going to try to get that money back. And when they come back to the table, it won't be friendly. Charter flights? That could be the first thing gone. Salary growth? Frozen. You could be looking at max deals capped way lower than what was on the table this year. And here's the scary part. The players would lose momentum and leverage. No games, no ratings growth, no headlines, no buzz. If that happens, I could honestly see salaries sliding back towards those $200K max contracts just to keep the league alive when this is all over. And that's the part nobody wants to say out loud. They might have to accept less just to make sure there is still a WNBA standing when this is all over. It said here, the letter was sent nearly a week before the March 10th date the league gave the WNBA-PA last month to try to complete a term sheet for a new CBA. The 2026 regular season is scheduled to begin May 8th, but before then, the league must hold a college draft, currently scheduled for April 13th, a two-team expansion draft, and free agency for more than 100 players. The letter starts with Plum and Stewart expressing immense gratitude for Jackson's leadership of the Players Association over the past decade and the results she's garnered in that span, adding they believe she wants what's best for players. But we are frustrated that we have not made more progress as we near the March 10th deadline, Stewie and Plum continue, and we believe this is a result of a breakdown in communication between you and the executive committee, and players more broadly. The WNBA-PA opted out of the previous CBA nearly 17 months ago, in October 2024, and negotiations have ramped up over the past 8 months. But Stewie and Plum say they have been privy to details of these negotiations for less than 2 months, having first seen a proposal in January. That's a communication breakdown. That's a strategy breakdown. It feels like the PA believed they could pressure ownership into conceding through activism, social media momentum, public support, strong messaging. And yes, public opinion matters, but when you're asking people to move hundreds of millions of dollars, hashtags and buzzwords aren't enough. That might work in theory. It doesn't always work in billion-dollar negotiations, not in 2026.
Now, here's some of the examples of requested information include a detailed breakdown of the WNBA's expenses and revenue to the best of our understanding, a comparative analysis between potential losses players would face in a delayed or strike-shortened season versus the potential gains achieved in a new CBA earned through continued negotiations, a clear description of how rookie salaries will be structured and how they scale during a rookie contract. So, here's the part that really blows my mind. The players don't even know what the rookie contract structure is going to look like. Everyone online is debating rookie deals like they're finalized, but from what we're hearing, the players themselves haven't been fully briefed. They don't know the structure. They don't know the numbers. That's crazy. On top of that, they haven't even been shown a clear strike offset breakdown. People keep saying, oh, the union has $9 million. They can cover the players. Okay, but that $9 million doesn't just magically become salaries. A big portion of that money goes toward union operations, leadership costs, retired player obligations, legal fees, insurance, and health benefits. Once you factor in off-season coverage and all the required expenses, what's actually left per player could be far lower than people think. You might realistically be talking $20,000 to $30,000 per player for the year, maybe $30,000 on the high end. And when you compare that to a $200,000 minimum salary, that's not a small gap. That's life-changing money. That's not something players can just brush off. Okay, here it said, as we understand it, the executive committee's role is to help shape the overall goals and priorities of the CBA, and to serve as a bridge between your negotiating team and the broader membership, ultimately helping to secure player approval of any deal, they wrote. Without access to the information requested above, the executive committee cannot fulfill this role, and players cannot be expected to engage meaningfully in a process they have largely been excluded from. So, here's the issue. How can players accept a deal if they're not even being clearly told what the deal is? They can't sign off on something they haven't fully seen or understood. That's just common sense. And there's no way a large portion of the locker room would willingly agree to lower their gross revenue share from 27% to 26%, thinking somehow that solves everything. That doesn't add up. You're not gaining leverage by asking for less. There have to be players sitting there saying, wait, what are we doing? How is this helping? If the details aren't transparent, frustration is inevitable. But it says here, Stewart and Plum requested an executive meeting within 24 hours to discuss the requested information, which then turned into an all-player meeting. Again, I'm going to talk about this more later, but that feels like sabotage. That is literally sabotage. When we and other players expressed concerns with leadership, we were made to feel as though we were acting against the interests of the PA. They said many players across the league share the same frustrations that were expressed to us and feel unable to speak out. Again, that's intimidation. That's sabotage. It feels like there is a group of people involved here. I don't know if it's veteran players. I don't know if it's the PA executive committee. I don't know if it's a mindset of wanting this to be more of an activist movement rather than focusing on growing it as a basketball league. And I do think there's a bit of that in play. But whoever that group is, they seem willing to risk burning it down. And there are hundreds of players who aren't willing to do that. Now, here it said, ESPN previously reported that there has been a strong debate within the executive committee in recent months over how to proceed in negotiations, with a split over willingness to hold out or to take a deal more in line with the league's latest proposal. In a player call last week, a source told ESPN over half of player leadership reaffirmed its desire to keep a strike on the table. The WNBPA player body authorized the executive committee to call a strike when necessary. Okay, if we're being real here, nobody like people made this vote to have like a united front, not because they want to strike. Here said, last week, ESPN reported that players will receive revenue-sharing payments for the first time in league history, and that the union will also divvy up an additional $9.25 million to players from licensing revenue generated since 2020 from jersey sales, trading cards, video games, and other merchandise. So I don't think people truly understand how little of that $9.5 million would actually reach the players if there's a strike. There are roughly 155 players in the league. On paper, you divide $9.5 million by 155 and think, okay, that's around $60,000 to $70,000 per player. Sounds manageable, right? But that's not how it works. That money isn't just salary replacement. It has to fund operations during a strike, training facilities, medical staff, insurance, strength coaches, physical therapy, administrative costs. Once you subtract all of that, you're realistically looking at something closer to $30,000 to $40,000 per player, and that's before housing. For a professional athlete, that's not sustainable. Before Unrivaled, Kelsey Plum told reporters the league's offer reflected a significant win. Some players agree, others see it as a slap in the face, and that's where the divide becomes obvious. It doesn't feel strictly young versus old. It feels more like players whose long-term income depends on the league versus players who see the league as part basketball, part platform. And that tension spills over into the fan base, too. Take Caitlin Clark. The way some corners of the internet treat her, edited photos, bait posts, attacking her appearance, and the fact that some players amplify that content, it creates this strange, cliquey atmosphere. It starts to look less like professional sports rivalry and more like social division. From the outside, it feels messy. And when negotiations are already fragile, that kind of cultural split only makes everything harder to fix. Here said other priorities they list include agreeing to a cap that, in expanding with revenue, allows for sustainable roster construction where max players don't have to take cuts to ensure a robust middle class, a guaranteed housing model for all players, the abolition of the core rule, and meaningful benefits for retired players. So, okay, if we're being real here, I think some people are genuinely fine with how this is playing out. But when you read that nearly a dozen player agents sent letters last week, that tells you something. Small click of tongue. The agents are stepping in now, and we've been saying this for a while. When agents start speaking publicly, it's usually because their players don't feel comfortable doing it themselves. Agents work for the players, so if they're raising concerns, it's not random. It's coming from conversations behind closed doors. Now, when you look at what Breanna Stewart and Kelsey Plum are doing, it's pretty clear they're pushing to play. They're pushing for a deal. You may not agree with every tactic, but their position seems rooted in keeping the league moving forward. And that's where the divide feels obvious. There are people pushing for long-term growth, sustainable gains, and protecting the next generation of players. Then there are tactics that feel more like drawing hard lines, throwing out demands that ownership structurally can't meet and calling it negotiation. You can say gross revenue share is non-negotiable for players. That's fair. But ownership structures aren't just one person writing a check. Even if multiple team owners wanted to move in that direction, there are other stakeholders, league economics, and financial realities involved. When you demand something that everyone knows can't be implemented under the current model, that's not leverage, that's escalation. And escalation without a backup plan can burn everything down. What worries me most is whether everyone at the table is thinking about the young players, the rookies, the ones who haven't secured generational money yet. Because if this collapses, they're the ones who feel it hardest. And that's how I see it. Tell me what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe.